Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Thanksgiving in our family has never been loud, never the kind of chaotic mess you see in movies with kids screaming and turkey flying and uncles passing out drunk on the couch. No, in our house, the chaos is clean. It's dressed in beige sweaters and polite smiles, manicured fingernails that grip wine glasses too tightly, and laughter that never quite reaches the eyes. That kind of dinner is worse, if you ask me. Because when people are screaming, at least the poison's out in the open. But in our family, the poison simmers under cranberry sauce and gets passed around with the mashed potatoes. I was already on edge before the turkey hit the table. Aunt Sharon had been eyeing me the second I walked in the door, like she was waiting for the right moment to strike. She's the kind of woman who never says anything directly cruel, at least not until she's 3 glasses in. Then it comes out like clockwork. She doesn't shout or curse or slam her fist down. No, she cuts you slow. Like a paper cut across the ego. I hadn't even sat down properly when she started in, complimenting my cousin Mike on his new listing like he was selling castles instead of foreclosed bungalows in towns with more boarded-up windows than open doors. Then she turned to me, gave me this tiny smile, and said, "Still doing that writing thing?" She said it like I'd been diagnosed with something she hoped was temporary. I smiled because that's what I've always done. Smile, nod, let it slide. Yeah, still writing, I said, pouring myself some coffee even though I already felt sick. She laughed and turned to my mom. Well, at least they're persistent. I don't know what it was about this particular Thanksgiving that made it feel different. Maybe it was because I was older now, less patient. Or maybe it was because for once I hadn't come home hoping to be seen. I'd come home because, like a fool, I still thought maybe they'd ask about me and actually mean it. But no one did. Not really. The dinner passed slowly, full of forced conversation and endless chewing. Uncle Dean recited his usual political opinions like we were all desperate to hear what a man who reads bumper stickers for news had to say. My mom smiled her thin, brittle smile and asked if anyone wanted more rolls. And I kept quiet. That's the role I play in this family. The quiet one. The helper. The one who refills drinks and clears plates and never asks for anything. Not even respect. It happened just as dessert was being served. Sharon, now flushed from wine and too much of her own voice, looked at me while I was cutting the pie and said it. Just like that. Like she was talking about the weather. Everyone knows you'll never be anything special. You're too average. Face it, I didn't drop the pie. I didn't throw a fork. I didn't even blink. I just kept slicing, like she hadn't said something that gutted me right there next to the whipped cream. I think that was what made it hit harder, how casual it was. Like she believed it so fully, so deeply, that she didn't think it could possibly hurt me. Or maybe she did, and that was the whole point. I heard Mike chuckle under his breath, and my mom said nothing, not a word. Just took another sip of her coffee and stared at her plate. That silence? That hurt worse than Sharon's words. There's a thing that happens when someone you love says something that confirms your worst fear. It's like the ground gives way under you, but nobody else seems to notice. They just keep eating, keep chatting, keep acting like everything's fine while you're down there in the wreckage, trying to remember how to breathe. I finished cutting the pie. I plated it. I handed out slices. I smiled the whole damn time. And the whole time, there was this voice in my head, not Sharon's, not even my own, but something deeper. Something sharp. It said, remember this. Every second. Burn it in. Because this is the moment they'll regret. That night, after everyone left, I washed the dishes while my mom sat in the living room watching Hallmark reruns. She didn't ask how I was. She never does. I kept my back to her and scrubbed that pie plate like it was a crime scene. People think revenge is loud. They think it's breaking things and screaming and walking away in flames. But the best revenge? It's patient. It's quiet. It's served just like that pie. Neat. Warm. Looks sweet. Burns like hell going down. I helped serve the pie, but I wasn't swallowing this one. The day after Thanksgiving is always worse than the holiday itself, and not just because the stuffing starts to turn to cement in your gut, or because you wake up tasting judgment in the back of your throat. It's worse because the adrenaline of surviving the performance wears off, and what you're left with is the cold silence of your apartment and the echo of things you wish you'd said but didn't. I came home with a to-go container full of sadness, and half a slice of that pie I didn't even want. My place smelled like burnt coffee and the garlic I forgot to clean out of the trash, and the quiet was so loud it felt like it was pressing on my chest. I threw the trash out sometime around 10 that night, still wearing the jeans I'd stuffed myself into for dinner, and a hoodie I hadn't washed in over a week. I stared down at the bag and thought, this is symbolic as hell, because everything in it felt like it belonged in the same category as that dinner. Spoiled, unwanted, and way past its expiration date. On the way back upstairs, I passed my neighbor's cat sunbathing in the hallway like it paid rent, and I muttered something to it about how at least it didn't have an aunt who spit venom with her teeth showing. The cat blinked and walked away, probably to go be loved by someone who didn't grow up being told they were a disappointment. Back inside, I sat at my little desk wedged between the kitchen and the bathroom door, surrounded by rejection emails so old they should have come with sympathy cards. I opened my laptop out of muscle memory more than hope. Writing had become one of those things I did the way people go to the gym in January, good intentions, terrible follow-through. But I'd written something once, something that had sat in a folder called Stuff That Won't Matter for over 3 years. I didn't even remember what it was about, just that I wrote it on a night when I couldn't sleep and couldn't breathe from holding everything in. I opened it, read it, and for the first time in forever, it didn't make me cringe. It was an essay. Simple. Honest. No flowery language, no big metaphors. Just me, raw and tired, talking about how family isn't always home, and silence can sometimes cut deeper than hate. I remember writing it with a lump in my throat and a feeling like I was confessing something I wasn't supposed to say out loud. And maybe that's why I never submitted it. Because admitting your family broke you is one thing, but admitting you're still bleeding from it, that's another beast entirely. But that night, I figured, why the hell not? I sent it to a small online magazine I used to follow before the algorithm buried it in favor of hot takes and celebrity gossip. I didn't even check to see if they were still active. I just hit send, closed my laptop, and went to bed telling myself it didn't matter either way. And then, for a while, it didn't. 2 weeks went by. Then 4. Then 6. I forgot about it, to be honest. Went back to applying for jobs I didn't want, eating cereal for dinner, and answering texts from people who never asked how I was doing. It all felt the same, flat, gray, predictable. Until one night, right around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Subject line, "We want your story." I stared at it for a good 5 minutes before opening it, because part of me was sure it was going to say, "We want your story, so we can use it as an example of what not to do." But it didn't. They loved it. They called it brutal and soft in the same breath. Said they wanted to run it in their upcoming issue and pay me, actually pay me, a couple $100 for it. I swear to God, when I saw the email, I screamed so loud I scared my neighbor's cat off the balcony. It was the 4th floor. Don't worry, he had 8 lives left. I read the email 10 times, pacing back and forth like I'd just been told I was pregnant with potential. My hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. And suddenly, it wasn't about the money or even the publication. It was about someone reading something I said and not laughing, not mocking, not shaking their head. They believed in it. And by extension, maybe in me. The piece went live a week later. Quietly, no fireworks, no big announcement. But it started to float around. People shared it, commented, messaged me things like, "This felt like you lived inside my head," and I didn't know anyone else grew up feeling like a ghost in their own house. One woman from Arizona said her daughter printed it and taped it to her bedroom wall. I don't know why, but that one broke me a little. In a good way. Then came the second email. This one from a senior editor at a publication I'd actually heard of, the kind that shows up in dentist offices and airports and waiting rooms. She said she read my piece and wanted to talk. "We're running a feature on family ghosts," she said. "And yours is loud." I stared at the screen again, thinking, ghosts? Yeah, I've got a few. And for the first time, I didn't want to run from them. I wanted to give them a stage. It had been just under 4 months since the night I sent that old essay into the digital void, and in that time, my life had been slowly, quietly, and almost imperceptibly shifting under my feet like I'd been walking on gravel that was suddenly trying to become concrete. I'd done 2 more essays since then, one about growing up in a house where love felt conditional, and another about the way silence from your own mother could feel louder than any insult a stranger could throw your way. Both hit harder than I expected, picked up by that same editor who'd written me late at night about family ghosts, who kept saying my words had weight and sting and subtle fire, though I still had no real sense of what that meant in the real world. I kept living the same life on the surface, still in the same apartment, still microwaving sad leftovers, still pretending I wasn't waiting for the next email to tell me I wasn't wasting my time, but inside, something was building. That quiet part of me that had always swallowed every insult, every little backhanded jab from Aunt Sharon or dead-eyed chuckle from Cousin Mike, it had started to stir like a sleeping dog remembering it had teeth. So when I turned the corner of my street one Tuesday morning and stopped at the corner newsstand, something I almost never did, I wasn't prepared to see my own face looking back at me from the glossy cover of a magazine I'd grown up flipping through in waiting rooms and barbershops. The title above my photo was bold, black, and brutal in the most perfect way, "The Ones They Forgot." There I was, slightly off-center, eyes steady, mouth almost smirking, like I already knew the cover would piss somebody off. I stood there so long that the vendor finally asked if I was okay. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost, or maybe like I'd just come face to face with the version of myself I always hoped might exist someday. I bought 3 copies, one for me, one for a frame, and one I would eventually give to someone who used to think I'd never be anything worth printing. Back in my apartment, I didn't text anyone. Not my mom. Not my best friend from college. Not even the barista who always called me darlin' and once asked to read my stuff. I didn't post it online. I didn't even call the editor to say thank you. I just laid the magazine out on my coffee table like it was an altar and sat there staring at it with a weird mix of pride, fear, and this heavy, hollow ache in my stomach. Then, about 2 hours later, the text came in. From Aunt Sharon. It was just a screenshot. No greeting. No congratulations. Not even a passive-aggressive jab. Just the cover, cropped so it showed only my face and that title, "The Ones They Forgot." I stared at it for a long time. Long enough to wonder how long she had stared at it before deciding to send it. Long enough to wonder if she'd read any of the piece inside, or if just seeing my name was enough to punch a hole in whatever version of me she'd built to mock all these years. I didn't respond. Didn't heart the message. Didn't even open it fully. Just left her sitting there on read, like a ghost knocking on a door they no longer have a key to. There's something unspeakably powerful about silence when you've spent your whole life on the wrong end of it. Later that afternoon, I opened the magazine again and flipped to page 4, where the full feature began. My words, printed in crisp serif font, took up the entire page, and at the top was the pull quote they'd chosen from the interview, something I'd said offhandedly and barely remembered saying, "Family can raise you or raise you. It all depends on who's holding the match." And right below it, the opening line of the piece. The line I knew would make Aunt Sharon's jaw clench so hard she'd grind her veneers down to the gums. My aunt once told me I'd never be anything special, and I believed her until I realized her definition of special meant silent. I knew she would read that. I knew she would feel the cold mirror of it, the unflinching reflection of who she was, not as she saw herself, but as I remembered her being in all those Thanksgivings, year after year, when I was nothing but helpful hands and a target for her bitterness. And I didn't feel guilt or fear or even triumph. I just felt ready. Like the first domino had tipped. The interview went live that morning. I knew exactly what she would read on page 4. Some memories don't feel like they happened in the past. They feel like they're still happening right now, just on a screen behind your eyes, playing on a loop when you least expect it. That's what Thanksgiving 10 years ago is for me. It isn't a distant recollection tucked neatly into some mental attic. It's an open drawer I walk past every damn day. I remember the table, how it was dressed up like a wedding reception, with stiff linen napkins folded into triangles and a centerpiece that looked like it had tried too hard to be rustic. I remember the smell of sweet potatoes and overcooked turkey and how, underneath all of it, there was this tension in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Everyone smiled too wide. Everyone said please and thank you like they were reading from a script. And then came the moment that's never left me, not for a single day since. It was after dinner, when we were all slumped in that food coma fog and Aunt Sharon started her usual passive-aggressive inventory of everyone's life decisions. My cousin Mike was blabbing about his new job, his second new job that year, if anyone was counting, but Sharon was eating it up, bragging like she'd personally taught him how to sell someone a broken umbrella in the desert. Then her eyes slid over to me, and I could feel it before she even opened her mouth. That heat. That sharpening. That familiar weight like I'd just been summoned to a firing squad without a trial. She asked if I was still doodling poems in that voice she reserves for things she considers useless, like veganism or community college. I told her I'd actually just had something published in a small local zine. Nothing big, but something. I even said it with a little pride in my voice, like maybe this time she'd hear me. Maybe this time she'd nod and say, "That's good, keep going." But instead, she laughed. Not a snicker, not a chuckle, but a full-body laugh that made her wine glass tremble in her hand. "Well, I hope you're not planning to live off that," she said, and everyone laughed with her. Mike, Uncle Dean, even the woman next to him whose name I never remembered. It was like she cracked a joke and the room clicked into applause. My cheeks burned so hot, I thought the candles on the table were leaning toward me. But what I remember most isn't her laugh. It's my mom. She said nothing. Not one word. Not a glance. Just sipped her wine and looked down at her plate like if she avoided eye contact, maybe she wouldn't have to acknowledge what had just happened. That silence from her, it broke something in me I didn't even know could crack. Now, 10 years later, I'm sitting in an entirely different world. The magazine cover had blown up in ways I never expected. Classmates I hadn't spoken to since high school were sharing it, tagging me, saying things like "always knew you were going places," which was funny because back then, they mostly knew me as the quiet one with a weird notebook and shoes with holes in them. I got an email from an editor at a publishing house asking if I'd ever considered turning my essays into a full-length book. There were whispers of panels, podcasts, even an invitation to speak at a small conference about generational trauma, which is the kind of phrase I used to roll my eyes at until I realized I'd been living it my whole damn life. And then the phone rang. It was Mom. I hadn't spoken to her since she'd sent a polite congrats text about the magazine, like I'd just graduated traffic school. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity still had its hooks in me. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Sharon's upset," she said, like she was announcing the weather. I didn't say anything, because what was there to say? "She says you made her look like a villain," she added, a little too softly, like she knew it was already a losing battle. I let that hang for a second before I finally said, "She made herself look like one." I just turned the lights on. There was a long silence after that, one of those silences that feels like it's stretching between two planets, trying to see which one will shatter first. Then she said something that knocked the air out of me more than any of Sharon's comments ever had. "Well, maybe you shouldn't have written it." Just like that. Like it was that simple. Like speaking the truth was more dangerous than what had actually happened. Like it was my fault for finally saying the quiet part out loud. And in that moment, something inside me went still. Because here it was, Laid bare as ever, her priority wasn't me. It never had been. It was keeping the peace, keeping Sharon comfortable, keeping the tablecloth neat and free of stains. My pain was less important than the family narrative. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just breathed in, slow and deep, and said, okay. She asked if I was still there, but I didn't answer. I hung up. That was the last call I took from her. 1 year later, the leaves had browned the same way, the air had cooled with that familiar sleepy weight of late November, and once again the houses in the neighborhood wore their usual disguise of warmth, lights in the windows, turkey on the table, and tension stitched tightly beneath the seams of civility. But this time, I wasn't dragging my feet toward that old front door. I wasn't arriving with a hollow chest and quiet tongue, hoping to avoid the sharp end of someone else's bitterness. This time, I walked in like someone who no longer flinched at ghosts because I'd already written them into history. I showed up alone, as always, but something about me was different now, even if I wore the same coat and parked in the same driveway. There's a shift that happens when you're no longer seeking approval, when you're not here to be tolerated or dismissed, but instead to reclaim a seat that was always yours to begin with. I brought a pie, pecan, homemade, still warm, and when I stepped into the house and handed it to my mother, her eyes lingered just a second too long on the box before she took it. She said thank you like the words were dusty in her mouth. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't have to. The answer was printed in every copy of that magazine, still sitting in stacks at bookstores across the country. Sharon was already there, of course. Hair dyed a little darker, earrings a little flashier, smile just as polished and poisonous as ever. She greeted me the same way people shake hands at funerals, out of obligation, not affection. You've been busy, she said, letting the pause between words do the heavy lifting. I nodded, smiling with all the softness of steel. Yeah, lot of people to disappoint. My voice was even, polite, but it carried the weight of a sentence that meant more than it said. She knew it. Everyone at that table knew it. The house smelled the same, stuffing and sage, and something artificial that tried too hard to feel like comfort. The same tablecloth, the same chairs, the same glasses with the little gold rims that faded more each year. But this time, I didn't shrink into my seat. I sat like I belonged, like I wasn't apologizing for taking up space anymore. Dinner passed in that delicate dance of clinking forks and fake laughter, a ritual so rehearsed you could almost hear the script pages turning. Mike rambled on about his big real estate comeback, even though Zillow would probably tell a different story. Mom kept busy with refills and interruptions, trying to smooth every awkward edge with casseroles and compliments. No one mentioned the magazine, not directly, but they didn't have to. I caught them glancing at me, then away, like my name had become something sacred or dangerous, depending on how you held it. Then dessert came. I stood, went to the kitchen, and returned with my pie. Set it down carefully in the center of the table. And then, as calm as anything, I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the magazine, laminated, glossy, pristine. Autographed in silver ink on the corner, to the ones who forgot me. I didn't forget you. I placed it next to the pie like a second centerpiece. Silence swallowed the room. You could have heard a thought drop. Sharon's hand froze mid-reach. Her face didn't move, but her fingers twitched around the stem of her wine glass, the same way they used to when she was about to deliver one of her sugar-coated slaps to the ego. But this time, she said nothing. Not a single word. Her smile held, but her eyes betrayed her. I leaned forward slowly, not raising my voice, not showing my teeth, just letting the weight of my words settle like dust that had been waiting a long time to fall. You were wrong, I said, soft but solid. And I hope you remember that every year, when you taste this pie. She blinked, once, twice, but didn't speak. No apology came. No argument. No dramatic scene. Just silence, rich and heavy and finally mine. We all ate. The pie was good. Too sweet, maybe, but it left the right kind of burn. After that, I didn't stay long. I said my goodbyes, picked up my coat, and walked out with the kind of peace you only earn after carrying someone else's doubt for too long and finally setting it down where they can see it. No one chased me out. No one tried to stop me. They just watched, quiet, unsure what came next. That night, I slept better than I had in years. And this morning, when I checked my phone, there it was. Another text from Sharon. Another screenshot. Same face. Same cover. No message. No context. Just the picture again. I stared at it for a while, sipping coffee in the quiet of my apartment, where the only sound was the soft hum of the heater kicking on and the distant bark of someone's dog a few buildings over. She never apologized. Not once. Never said she was wrong. Never acknowledged the cruelty she wrapped in laughter and served up every year like another side dish. But this morning, she sent me another screenshot. No words, just the picture. I guess even ghosts know when to haunt themselves.